The discovery. Ethan Caldwell stood in the dimly lit basement of his grandfather's old Victorian house, the air thick with dust and memories. He had inherited this place just 3 weeks ago after his grandfather's passing, a man who had always been a bit of an enigma in his life. The house was filled with oddities, strange artifacts, ancient books, and countless boxes labeled with cryptic notes that hinted at adventures long forgotten. As he surveyed the cluttered space, he felt a mix of nostalgia and determination. Today was the day he would finally tackle the renovations that had been long overdue. Armed with tools and a flashlight, he began clearing away debris from the corner where an ancient circuit breaker box sat like a sentinel of the past. "Come on, you old rust bucket," he muttered under his breath as he jimmied the master switch with little success. The darkness enveloped him as he clicked the flashlight on and off, its beam illuminating swirling dust motes that danced in the stale air. Ethan's mind wandered back to stories his grandfather had told him about this house, tales of hidden compartments and secret passages that only the keenest eyes could find. He chuckled at how much of it he had dismissed as mere fantasy during his childhood. Then something caught his eye, a peculiar seam in the concrete wall behind the breaker box. It curved in an almost perfect circle, unlike anything he had seen before in standard construction. Curiosity piqued, he leaned closer, running his fingers along its edge. "What were you up to down here, Grandpa?" he whispered to himself. With a firm grip on his hammer, Ethan tapped lightly at the wall. The sound echoed hollowly back at him. Encouraged by this discovery, he swung harder, feeling the concrete give way surprisingly easily under his efforts. Dust exploded into the air as chunks fell away, revealing a dark space beyond. His flashlight beam caught something metallic glinting in the shadows, a large object shaped like an elongated egg. It stood at least 8 feet tall and shimmered with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "This is not happening," Ethan breathed as he took a step back. But his curiosity overrode any sense of caution. He reached out to touch it. The moment his fingers made contact with its surface, warmth radiated through him like living metal. Suddenly, symbols began to glow with an ethereal blue light that illuminated the basement in an otherworldly hue. "Oh crap," he exclaimed as he jerked his hand back just as a seam appeared along the pod's surface with a soft hiss of escaping air. The opening widened further until something moved within. Ethan stumbled backward, tripping over his toolbox and landing hard on the floor as a figure emerged from within the pod, a woman unlike any he had ever seen before. Her skin was a deep emerald green that shimmered under the dim light, her hair floated around her head like liquid silver, defying gravity in ways that made no sense. "Who are you?" Ethan managed to stammer as she blinked her glowing eyes at him. "I am Lyra," she said in perfect English but with an accent that seemed musical and foreign all at once. "I pledge myself to your service." Ethan blinked rapidly, trying to process her words while simultaneously grappling with disbelief. "What? Why were you in that pod?" Lyra knelt before him gracefully, her expression earnest yet bewildered. "I have been sealed away for centuries by those who sought my capture." "Centuries?" Ethan echoed incredulously as he scrambled to his feet. "You mean you've been sleeping down here all this time?" "Yes," she replied simply, glancing around at her surroundings as if they were foreign to her despite their familiarity to him. His mind raced as questions flooded in. Who was she really? Why was she here? And what did she mean by sealed away? "Okay," Ethan said slowly, trying to regain some semblance of control over this bizarre situation. "Let's start from the beginning." Lyra tilted her head slightly, her expression one of confusion mixed with curiosity. "I do not understand your customs well, I am still adjusting after my long slumber." Ethan took a deep breath. This was going to be one wild ride. "My name is Ethan Caldwell," he said finally. "And I think we need to figure out what's going on here." As they began talking more about her origins and why she had been hidden away in his grandfather's basement, an unexplainable connection formed between them, a bond forged through mystery and shared curiosity about each other's worlds. Little did they know that their encounter would set off a chain of events neither could have anticipated, one that would lead them into danger beyond their wildest dreams and unveil secrets long buried beneath layers of time and space. Understanding the past. Ethan Caldwell leaned against the kitchen counter, still trying to process the whirlwind of events that had unfolded in his basement. Lyra, the mysterious woman he had awakened from the alien pod, was now examining the kitchen appliances with a mix of curiosity and bewilderment. Her emerald skin glimmered under the fluorescent lights, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a strange attraction towards her, despite the chaos surrounding them. "Is this how you prepare your sustenance?" Lyra asked, holding up a toaster as if it were an ancient relic. Yeah," Ethan replied, running a hand through his hair. "You put bread in it, and it toasts it. It's pretty basic." Lyra turned the toaster over in her hands, studying it with intense interest. "Fascinating. Your people rely on such primitive technology for nourishment?" Ethan chuckled nervously. "You have no idea how much I wish I could explain this all to you without sounding ridiculous." "Ridiculous," she echoed, her head tilting slightly as she considered his words. "You have awakened me from centuries of stasis. I believe your situation is far more complex than mine." Ethan sighed and leaned back against the counter. "Okay, let's start with what you remember about your past. You mentioned something about being hunted?" Lyra's expression shifted from curiosity to seriousness as she set the toaster down and faced him directly. "Yes, I was pursued by the Galactic Council's enforcers, powerful beings who seek to control those like me who possess unique abilities." "What kind of abilities?" Ethan asked, intrigued. "I can manipulate energy," she explained, her voice steady but laced with an underlying tension. "It is why they sought to imprison me. My powers could disrupt their control over other worlds." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as he contemplated the implications of her words. "So, they wanted to capture you because you're dangerous?" "Only to those who wish to maintain power over others," Lyra replied, her eyes flashing with determination. "I have never sought conflict, I only wish to be free." "Free from what?" Ethan pressed. Lyra hesitated for a moment before continuing. "From those who would exploit my abilities for their own gain. Your grandfather offered me sanctuary when I fled from them. He hid me here, in this house." Ethan's mind raced as he processed this information. "So my grandfather knew about all of this? He was involved with aliens?" "Yes," Lyra confirmed, her gaze unwavering. "He was a scholar of sorts, an archaeologist who understood that there is more to this universe than what your people perceive." Ethan felt a surge of pride mixed with confusion at his grandfather's hidden life. What else did he know? What did he leave behind? Lyra stepped closer, her presence overwhelming yet comforting at the same time. "We must search this house together. There may be records or artifacts that can help restore my memories and explain why I was hidden here." "Okay," Ethan agreed reluctantly. "But we need to be careful, if anyone finds out about you." "I understand," she interrupted softly, her eyes reflecting a deep understanding of his concerns. As they began their search through the house, Ethan led Lyra through rooms filled with dusty furniture and forgotten treasures that had been untouched for years. Each item seemed to hold a story waiting to be uncovered. In what used to be his grandfather's study, they found shelves lined with books on archaeology and ancient civilizations alongside journals filled with sketches and notes in languages Ethan couldn't decipher. "This is incredible," Ethan said as he flipped through one of the journals filled with symbols similar to those on the alien pod. Lyra leaned closer, her fingers brushing against his as she pointed at a particular passage that seemed to resonate with her memories. "I recognize this language, it is an ancient dialect used by my people." Ethan watched in awe as she translated some of the text aloud, her voice flowing like music and filling the room with an energy that made his heart race. "It speaks of a prophecy," Lyra said after a moment, her expression shifting from excitement to concern. "It foretells of a time when one from my world would awaken and seek refuge among humans, a time when our worlds would collide once more." "What does that mean?" Ethan asked, feeling a mix of fear and intrigue. "It means that our fates are intertwined," she replied solemnly. "If I am to survive, I must uncover why I was hidden here and what role your grandfather played in all of this." Ethan felt a weight settle on his shoulders as he realized just how deep this mystery ran, not only for Lyra but also for himself and his family legacy. As they continued their exploration, they stumbled upon an old trunk tucked away in a corner of the study. Its leather exterior was cracked and worn, but something about it drew Ethan in. "Help me open this," he said urgently. Together they pried open the trunk's rusty latch, revealing its contents, a collection of artifacts, strange crystals that pulsed softly with light, intricate maps depicting constellations unfamiliar to Ethan's eyes, and what appeared to be an ornate dagger adorned with symbols similar to those on Lyra's pod. "This is remarkable," Ethan exclaimed as he lifted the dagger carefully from its resting place. Lyra gasped softly as she reached for it too, her fingers brushing against his once more, a spark igniting between them that neither could ignore. "That dagger belonged to my ancestors," she said reverently. "It is said to hold great power, a connection between our worlds." "Power?" Ethan echoed skeptically but intrigued nonetheless. "Yes," Lyra affirmed with conviction. "It can amplify my abilities and protect us from those who would seek to harm me." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine at the thought of enemies lurking just beyond their doorstep, of forces beyond his comprehension threatening everything he held dear. "What do we do now?" he asked quietly. "We must prepare," Lyra said decisively. "If we are going to uncover the truth about your grandfather's involvement and why I was hidden here, we need allies, people who can help us navigate both worlds." Ethan nodded slowly. He could feel the weight of responsibility settling on him like never before. He had gone from being an ordinary guy renovating an old house to being entangled in an intergalactic conflict involving ancient prophecies and alien powers. As they stood surrounded by secrets waiting to be uncovered, Ethan realized that this journey would change everything, not just for Lyra but for him as well, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay ahead. Unexpected visitors. The tension in the Caldwell household was palpable as Ethan and Lyra stood in the kitchen, the remnants of their earlier conversation swirling in the air like the dust motes illuminated by the overhead light. The strange circumstances of their meeting weighed heavily on Ethan's mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental. "Okay, so we need to figure out a plan," Ethan said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We can't just sit here waiting for something to happen." Lyra nodded, her emerald eyes glinting with determination. "You're right. We must uncover more about your grandfather's past and why he chose to hide me here. But we also need to be prepared for any potential threats from the Galactic Council." Ethan rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "Right. But first, we need to get our story straight. If anyone else comes by, we can't let them know you're, well, you." Lyra's expression softened, a hint of amusement dancing in her eyes. "I can adapt my appearance as needed, but I will need your guidance to understand your customs better." "Great," Ethan replied, glancing at the clock on the wall. "Just as long as you don't accidentally reveal yourself while trying to blend in." Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the house, jolting both of them from their thoughts. Ethan exchanged a worried glance with Lyra before heading cautiously toward the front door. "Stay back," he whispered, motioning for her to hide behind a nearby wall. He opened the door just enough to peek outside. Standing there was Clara Jensen, his childhood friend and neighbor. Her bright red hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore an expression that combined curiosity and concern. "Hey, Ethan. I saw your truck outside and thought I'd check in on you," Clara said cheerfully. "How's the renovation going?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure how much to reveal. It's going, fine. Just working on some electrical stuff. Clara raised an eyebrow skeptically. Electrical stuff? You've been at it for weeks now. You sure you're not just avoiding talking about your granddad? Ethan felt a pang of guilt at her words but quickly brushed it aside. No, really. Just getting everything sorted out. Clara peered past him into the dimly lit hallway. Is someone else here? I thought I heard voices. Ethan's heart raced as he tried to think of a plausible excuse. Oh, that's just, music. I was listening to some old records while I worked. Clara crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe with a knowing smile. You're terrible at lying, you know that? You could have just told me you were having company. Yeah, well, Ethan stammered, searching for words that wouldn't betray Lyra's presence. Before he could respond further, Clara pushed past him into the house. I'm coming in. I want to see what you've done with this place. Wait. Ethan called after her as she stepped into the living room. Clara glanced around at the scattered tools and boxes before her gaze landed on Lyra, who had stepped out from her hiding spot with an air of confusion mixed with curiosity. Who's this? Clara asked, her eyes widening as she took in Lyra's otherworldly appearance. This is, Dr. Alina Green, Ethan said quickly, improvising a name on the spot. She's a visiting scholar studying my grandfather's collection. Lyra smiled warmly but remained silent, observing Clara with interest. A scholar? Clara repeated skeptically as she extended her hand towards Lyra. Nice to meet you. What are you studying? Lyra took Clara's hand gently and replied smoothly, I'm fascinated by ancient civilizations and their artifacts, particularly those related to interstellar cultures. Ethan watched as Clara's expression shifted from suspicion to intrigue. Wow. That sounds amazing. So you're into archaeology too? Yes, Lyra said with genuine enthusiasm. Your world has such rich histories and stories waiting to be uncovered. Clara's eyes sparkled with excitement as she turned back to Ethan. You should have told me you had company. This is incredible. I can't believe you're working with someone who studies interstellar cultures. Ethan felt a mix of relief and anxiety wash over him. Clara seemed genuinely interested but also completely oblivious to the deeper implications of Lyra's presence. Yeah, he said cautiously. It's been an interesting experience so far. Clara looked around again before settling her gaze back on Ethan. So what exactly are you two working on? Ethan hesitated again. He didn't want to reveal too much but knew he couldn't keep lying either. We're just cataloging some items my grandfather collected over the years. Cataloging? Clara echoed with interest. Like what? Is there anything cool? As if sensing his struggle to maintain control of the conversation, Lyra interjected smoothly, we found some fascinating artifacts related to ancient cultures and their connections across galaxies. Clara's eyes widened even more at this revelation. Galaxies? Like, aliens? Yes, Lyra replied earnestly, her enthusiasm shining through despite Ethan's internal panic. Ethan shot her a warning glance but realized it was too late. Clara was already captivated by Lyra's words. Wow! This is so cool! Clara exclaimed, practically bouncing on her heels with excitement. You have to show me everything. Ethan sighed inwardly, this was spiraling out of control faster than he could manage. Maybe later, he suggested weakly. But Clara was already moving toward one of the boxes filled with artifacts they had uncovered earlier that day. She began rifling through it eagerly while asking questions about each item she picked up. What's this one? And how about this one? She asked animatedly. Lyra joined in enthusiastically, explaining each piece with passion while Ethan stood back watching helplessly as his carefully constructed cover story unraveled before him. As Clara continued her enthusiastic exploration of their makeshift archaeological exhibit in his living room, Ethan felt a growing sense of dread. How long could they keep up this charade? What would happen if someone else found out about Lyra? Just then, another knock echoed through the house, a loud rapping that sent chills down Ethan's spine. Who could that be? He muttered under his breath as he exchanged worried glances with Lyra. I'll go check, Clara said cheerfully as she headed toward the door without waiting for an answer. No! Ethan exclaimed instinctively but was too late. She had already swung open the door. Standing there was an older man dressed in a crisp uniform, a local police officer known for being overly inquisitive about neighborhood happenings. Good evening, Officer Bennett said with an authoritative tone that made Ethan's heart race even faster than before. What seems to be going on here? Officer Bennett continued as his gaze swept over Ethan and then landed on Lyra curiously. Ethan opened his mouth but found no words coming out. Panic surged within him as he realized they were now teetering on the edge of exposure. As Officer Bennett stepped into their lives uninvited, Ethan knew that everything was about to change, and not necessarily for the better. The Galactic Council. Ethan stood at the threshold of his home, heart racing as he opened the door to Officer Bennett. The officer's presence loomed large, and Ethan felt the weight of scrutiny in his gaze. Behind him, Lyra shifted nervously, her form still disguised but her emerald eyes betraying her tension. Good evening, officer, Ethan said, forcing a smile. What brings you here? Just doing my rounds, Officer Bennett replied, his voice steady but probing. We've had reports of strange lights coming from this area. Thought I'd check in. Strange lights? Ethan echoed, trying to sound casual. Must be the old wiring acting up again. You know how these old houses can be. Right, the officer said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he scanned the interior of the house. Mind if I take a look around? Ethan's stomach dropped. I don't think that's necessary. Everything's fine here. Bennett raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. You sure? It's my job to ensure everything is safe and sound in this neighborhood. Before Ethan could respond, Lyra stepped forward, her human disguise still intact but her presence unmistakably commanding. Officer, I assure you that we are merely cataloging artifacts from Professor Caldwell's collection. There is nothing to worry about. Ethan shot her a warning glance but was surprised by how well she handled herself. The officer seemed taken aback by her sudden appearance and confidence. Artifacts? Bennett repeated, his interest piqued. What kind of artifacts? Historical items, Lyra replied smoothly, gesturing toward the cluttered living room filled with boxes and papers. Your local historian would find them quite fascinating. The officer hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, curiosity overcoming caution. All right then, but I'll need to see these artifacts for myself. Ethan felt a surge of panic as he led Officer Bennett into the living room. He could feel Lyra's tension beside him. They both understood that one wrong move could expose everything. As they entered the room, Bennett began examining the various items strewn about, old books, strange crystals, and maps that hinted at otherworldly origins. Interesting collection you've got here, he said, picking up an ancient-looking dagger adorned with unfamiliar symbols. Yes, Lyra said quickly, stepping closer to him and intercepting his gaze with her own. That dagger is particularly significant. It belonged to a long-lost civilization that believed in interstellar connections. Interstellar connections? Bennett echoed skeptically. Ethan felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back as he watched the officer's expression shift from curiosity to suspicion. You're telling me this stuff is connected to aliens? Lyra nodded earnestly. Indeed. Many cultures across the universe have sought to connect with one another through artifacts like these. Bennett's brow furrowed as he scrutinized Lyra more closely. And what exactly are you doing here? You don't look like any scholar I've ever met. Ethan jumped in before Lyra could respond. She's an expert on ancient civilizations. Just visiting for research purposes. The officer narrowed his eyes at Ethan, clearly not buying the story entirely but willing to let it slide for now. All right, Bennett said slowly, setting down the dagger and crossing his arms. But if I hear any more reports about strange happenings around here, I'll be back. Of course, Ethan replied quickly, relief flooding through him as he led Bennett back toward the door. As soon as they stepped outside and closed the door behind them, Ethan turned to Lyra with frustration etched across his face. What were you thinking? You can't just go around talking about aliens. Lyra's expression remained calm as she replied, I was merely trying to defuse the situation. It seemed effective at the time. Effective? Ethan echoed incredulously. You almost blew our cover. We need to be more careful. Just then, Clara appeared at the top of the stairs again, her expression curious as she watched them from a distance. Everything okay down there? Ethan felt his heart race again as he realized how close they were to being discovered once more. He forced a smile and waved her down. Yeah. Just, some minor electrical issues, he called out. Clara descended cautiously and joined them in the living room. I thought I heard voices again, who was that? Oh, just Officer Bennett checking in on me, Ethan replied quickly. Clara raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Instead, she turned her attention to Lyra with genuine interest. So you're studying artifacts too? That sounds amazing. Yes, Lyra said smoothly again, adopting a friendly demeanor as she engaged Clara in conversation. As they spoke about history and archaeology, Ethan felt a mix of admiration for Lyra's ability to adapt and frustration at how easily Clara accepted everything without question. But beneath it all lay an undercurrent of danger. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, by someone or something far beyond their understanding. Later that evening, after Clara had left and peace settled back over the house, Ethan found himself pacing in front of Lyra as she sat on the couch examining a book filled with sketches from his grandfather's travels. What do we do now? He asked finally. Lyra looked up from the pages with an intensity that made him pause. We need to understand why your grandfather helped me and what secrets he may have hidden within these walls. Ethan nodded slowly. It was time to dig deeper into his grandfather's past, into whatever mysteries lay buried beneath layers of time and dust. As they began sifting through more journals and artifacts together late into the night, Ethan couldn't shake off a growing sense of urgency, a feeling that their time was running out before the Galactic Council caught up with them. Suddenly, Lyra paused mid-sentence while reading one of the journals. Her expression shifted from concentration to alarm. What is it? Ethan asked anxiously. I remember something, she said breathlessly. A name connected to my capture. Admiral Coran. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine at hearing that name. It resonated with impending danger, a reminder that their troubles were far from over. What does it mean? He pressed urgently. It means we're not safe here, Lyra replied gravely. If Coran is involved, we must prepare for what comes next. As they braced themselves for an uncertain future filled with threats from beyond their world, Ethan knew one thing for certain: their lives would never be the same again. The final showdown. Ethan Caldwell stood in the kitchen, his heart racing as he opened the door to yet another unexpected visitor. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, illuminating the chaos of half-unpacked boxes and artifacts strewn about. Standing on his doorstep was a tall figure in a crisp uniform, Admiral Coran, an imposing presence that radiated authority. Good afternoon, Coran said, his voice deep and resonant. I'm looking for a fugitive named Lyra. She was last seen in this vicinity. Ethan's mind raced as he quickly assessed the situation. He had only recently learned Lyra's true identity and the danger she faced from the Galactic Council. The last thing he wanted was to expose her to this man, who exuded an air of menace. Lyra? Ethan repeated, feigning ignorance as he stepped back slightly to create distance. I'm not sure who you're talking about. Karan's piercing gaze narrowed as he stepped forward, clearly not fooled by Ethan's act. Don't play coy with me, human. I know she is here. I can sense her energy signature. Ethan felt a surge of panic wash over him. He needed to protect Lyra at all costs. Listen, I don't know what you're talking about, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Enough games, Karan growled, his voice low and threatening. You are harboring a dangerous being who has escaped from our custody. If you do not cooperate, I will have no choice but to take matters into my own hands. Just then, Lyra emerged from the shadows of the kitchen, her emerald skin glowing faintly as she stepped forward with an air of defiance. You will not take me back, Karan, she declared, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. Ethan's heart swelled with admiration for her bravery. Lyra, you don't have to face him alone, he said, stepping beside her protectively. Karan's eyes flicked between them with disdain. You think you can protect her? You are merely a human, a fragile creature caught in forces far beyond your understanding. I may be human, Ethan replied fiercely, but I won't let you harm her. She deserves to be free. Lyra placed a hand on Ethan's arm, grounding him as she turned to face Karan directly. I am no longer your prisoner, Admiral. I have found sanctuary here. Karan's expression hardened as he regarded Lyra with contempt. Sanctuary? You think these humans can shield you from the Council's wrath? You are mistaken. Ethan felt a surge of anger at Karan's arrogance. You don't know anything about us. We're not just going to let you waltz in here and take her away. Karan chuckled darkly, unfazed by Ethan's bravado. You underestimate my resolve. He reached for something at his side, a sleek device that pulsed with energy. Get back! Ethan shouted instinctively as he moved to shield Lyra from whatever Karan intended to do. But before Karan could activate his weapon, Lyra stepped forward again, her eyes glowing with determination. You will not harm him or this home, she declared fiercely. With that, she raised her hands and summoned a wave of energy that surged through the room like a tempest. The air crackled with power as light enveloped them both, pushing Karan back against the wall with incredible force. Ethan watched in awe as Lyra channeled her abilities, her emerald skin shimmering brighter than ever before as she drew upon the energy around them. Impressive, Karan admitted begrudgingly as he struggled against the force pushing him back. But futile. You cannot escape your fate. Lyra focused harder, and the energy intensified until it formed a protective barrier around them both, a shimmering dome that pulsed with vibrant colors. Together, she called out to Ethan, and without thinking, he reached for her hand, feeling an electric connection surge between them. As their energies intertwined within the barrier, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of purpose wash over him, a determination to protect what they had built together against all odds. Karan snarled and thrust his weapon toward them again, but before he could fire, Lyra unleashed a powerful blast of energy that shattered his device into sparks and debris. You will not take me, she shouted defiantly as the shockwave sent Karan sprawling backward. Ethan felt exhilarated by their combined strength. It was as if they were one entity fighting against an oppressive force together. But Karan was relentless. He quickly regained his footing and lunged forward again with renewed fury. You cannot hide forever. The Council will find you. Let them try. Ethan shouted back defiantly as he and Lyra stood firm against their adversary. As Karan charged toward them again, Lyra summoned another wave of energy, this time forming it into a brilliant beam that shot forth from her hands like a comet streaking through space. The beam struck Karan squarely in the chest, sending him flying across the room and crashing into a wall with enough force to rattle the house itself. Ethan felt a rush of adrenaline. They were winning. But even as victory seemed within reach, he knew they couldn't let their guard down. Is he done? Ethan asked breathlessly as they both stood ready for whatever came next. Lyra glanced at Karan's crumpled form on the floor, He groaned but slowly began to rise again, his eyes filled with rage and determination. "This isn't over." Coron spat defiantly as he staggered back to his feet. Ethan exchanged worried glances with Lyra. They needed to act fast before Coron could recover fully. "We need to get out of here," Ethan said urgently. "We can't let him follow us." Lyra nodded resolutely. Together they turned toward the basement, the place where it all began, the stasis pod still humming softly in its darkened corner. As they rushed down into the basement together, Ethan could feel their connection deepening, this strange bond forged through chaos and danger binding them closer than ever before. "What do we do now?" Ethan asked breathlessly once they reached the pod. "We must activate it," Lyra replied decisively. "It can shield us from detection while we plan our next move." "But how?" Ethan asked frantically as he scanned the controls surrounding it, symbols glowing faintly in response to their presence. "I can guide you," Lyra said confidently as she stepped closer to him once more, her emerald glow illuminating their surroundings like a beacon of hope amidst uncertainty. As they worked together to activate the pod's protective mechanisms, their hearts racing in sync, Ethan couldn't shake off an overwhelming sense of urgency. They were running out of time before Admiral Coron could regroup and come after them again. Finally, with one last surge of energy from Lyra, a brilliant flash enveloped them both, and just like that, they vanished from sight. In that moment of uncertainty and fear gave way to possibility. Together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, even if it meant venturing into uncharted territories beyond their understanding.